Bochka means barrel in English, and this word perfectly describes the characteristic transient of the kick drum we will be making today. To create the kick drum for this particular style of hard techno, we will need to use lots of layering, so we will be using a few different kick drum samples, a bit less of distortion, but definitely. We also need multiband compression and parallel processing. Every step and everything I've mentioned just now will be shown in today's video, so please pay attention because creating a full kick drum sound without using that much of distortion can be a bit tricky. If you are looking for more hard or industrial techno sounds and maybe serum presets, check out my sample packs website where I sell my hard techno reinforcement sample and serum preset pack. The project from today's tutorial, it can be downloaded from the Patreon website. And now let's dive into FL Studio, because there are lots of things you want to learn today. At first, let's start with picking the kick drum samples we will work with today. The Bochka kick drum doesn't have lots of punch in the low end. I would even say that in some tracks there is literally no punch in the low end, so this time Vengeance kick drums might not be the first choice. Instead of that, I will be interested in using a 909 kick drum. Our 909 kick sample doesn't need to be very punchy, but it needs to be round. It also needs to have a fat low end, because fat low end always helps you with distorting the kick drum sounds in a better way. And here I picked 4 different kick samples. It really doesn't matter what sample pack you use. The kick drums I'm using today, they come from a free to download 909 kick sample from some, let's say, random website. Let's play a 4/4 pattern to think what kick sound seems to flow best. For me, the second sample sounds most interesting. It also has a cool transient that in just a few minutes I will distort to enhance it. I like things organized, so let me rename all the channels and assign the kick drums to the mixer. I've just assigned this kick drum to the 12th channel in the mixer. From this channel mixer we expect to get the first transient sound. The first transient sound, because as I have said, we will want to use a few different kick drums today. It means that we will layer a few transient sounds together. We will use the distortion as the first effect in the channel mixer. And for me it means that I will be using again the most flexible and versatile wave-shaper distortion plugin I ever got. That is the Isotope Trash 2. Let's make sure that the input volume of the kick drum is loud enough. So I added 6.5 decibels to the input. I also subtract 6.5 decibels at the output. We will be using mostly the trash module. So at first I want to pick a right wave shaper curve that will transform and change the sound of the kick most. Depending on the wave shaper curve we pick here, the kick drum is going to have a different transient sound. And now when I distort the kick drum, I want to focus only on that transient, only on the way the kick drum sounds like in the beginning. The rest of the kick drum, the tail of the kick drum, doesn't bother me, because in just a few minutes I'm going to make this kick drum shorter. After picking the wave shape distortion curve, I can use both the middle section and the faders to the right to fine-tune the sound of that distortion. On top of using the sliders, I can double-click the drawing area to create a new point. And this newly created point will also modify further the shape of the distortion. To add even more complexity to the kick drum distortion, I can replace these tangent lines with shapes. For example, if we use the square option, the kick drum is going to get much more high frequencies. distortion can sound like that. For example, I also have the faders to the right that I can fine tune. Is that everything I can use inside of Trash 2 to distort the kick drum? Let's also experiment with adding a second stage of wave shaper distortion. How we can use these two different distortion stages inside of Trash 2? For example, the first distortion stage that I used right now is going to mangle the kick drum and create that transient. It's going to transform the kick drum completely. The second distortion stage though can make the kick drum only a bit warmer, which means that the amount of distortion coming from the second stage is going to be much smaller. If we assume that the amount of distortion coming from the second stage has to be smaller, then definitely the wave shaper distortion curve should look much more gentle than what do I have here. Take your time when distorting the kick drum, especially when you are using the Trash 2 plugin to distort the kick drum. Not only we can tweak many different options to change the sound of the transient, but also on top of that first transient, as I have said, we will be playing a few other transient sounds to get that powerful Bochka kick drum in the end. Working on the kick drums takes a lot of time, learning music production takes even more time. If you would like to speed up your learning process, if you are interested in me explaining other sound design or music production subjects to you, please check out my drillmusic.com website to learn more about my private music production lessons. Free consultations are available as well, so please use the calendar to schedule your meeting. Of course, inside of Trash 2 there are a few other ways to add even more complexity to the distortion. For example, using the filter section or the convolve one, but let's limit ourselves only to the trash module. This is an exemplary transient sound that I got by tweaking the knobs on a bit random basis. Now let me show you what does the first transient is going to sound like in the end. These are the Trash 2 settings I'm going to use in the end. Let's see again what does each distortion stage do. The first kick transient sounds interesting, it's a very clicky sound that I want to keep, but the rest of the kick drum will have to be, well, thrown out. Now I'm going to use the LFO tool to make this kick drum shorter, so we are left with the transient only. I want the LFO tool to be the second effect in the chain. And by creating a volume automation here in that window, I'm going to make the kick drum short enough. To precisely adjust the volume of the kick sound, I can use the left Alt button to make each point snap to the grid. The size of the grid can be adjusted here. I want to make the kick drum very short. The first transient sound is almost done. I've said that we will be playing a few transient sounds together. On top of these transients I will be also playing a rumble sound, so definitely this kick drum needs to have the low end removed to not create any problems with low frequencies overlap or clashing. I've added also quite a lot of distortion to get that cool transient sound, so unfortunately I have some high end that I need to cut as well. Let's use an equalizer after the LFO tool. There isn't that much of low end, but still, a high pass filter could be used. To create that characteristic transient for the Bochka kick drum, we will need lots of frequencies from around 300 Hz range. If I boost them right now by a lot, we will understand that these frequencies is what makes that characteristic barrel sound of the Bochka kick. So whenever we will be high passing a kick drum transient sound, I don't want to cut these frequencies with a high pass filter. So the cutoff should stay somewhere below 300 or maybe 250 Hz. Otherwise, the kick drum is going to get empty in the beginning. Regarding the low pass filter, there isn't any specific rule or guide to adjust that. We simply need to get rid of that noise and crunch that typically in the Bochka kick drum is not present. Here I can also pay attention to the steepness of the low pass filter. If I use a very steep and aggressive filter curve, the transient is going to sound a bit unnatural and it's going to have some sort of weird high end. To make this low pass sound more natural and transparent, use a more subtle filter. And in the end, I have filtered out the kick drum just like that. Please note that not only I can use a different filter type to control how many frequencies I'm removing, I can also use the filter resonance to shape the kick drum in a more detailed way. To give myself more of the headroom, that is the distance between the volume of the kick drum and the absolute 0 decibel ceiling, I'm using in the end Fruity Balance to turn down the volume of this transient by 12 decibels. Now we are ready to create another kick drum element. The second kick drum element we will create today is the distorted 909 kick sound. The transient we have just created a few minutes ago is very short. The second different type of kick drum sound will be the rumble sound that we will create in a few minutes. But the rumble sound, despite being very long, because the rumble will be played throughout the whole kick drum length, is going to fill only the low frequencies. So between the transient, the very short transient, and a rumble sound that fills only the low end, there should be another sound that fills the mid frequencies. The 909 kick sound is exactly that kind of sound we need to add. Because in the beginning of this tutorial, I picked a 909 kick sample, I'm going to use the same sample. I can duplicate this channel, and I route it to a separate channel in the mixer. Because this is a 909 kick, we will need to use a little of processing in that mixer channel. Now what is cool is that the processing of the 909 kick drum is going to be nearly the same as the processing of the transient. At first we will need to use Trash 2 to distort the 909 kick sample, but the amount of distortion will be little. Later I'm going to also make the 909 a bit shorter, but I will not make it that short as the transient sound. Again, the 909 will have to be filtered out because we will be playing the 909 on top of the rumble, and the volume of the 909 sample will also have to be adjusted. We will be using the exact same effects, but with a bit different settings. I've just copied the effects from the finished kick drum sound. You can see that the order of the plugins is identical. So now let me show you the differences in the plugin settings, starting out with the isotope Trash 2. Again, I'm using only the Trash module, but the amount of distortion coming from this plugin is going to be smaller than what we have experienced in the transient sound. The same rule applies. At first I'm using the first distortion stage to change the sound most. Not only I'm using a more aggressive wave shaper distortion curve by picking the right shape from the left part of the plugin, I also created another shape to modify the distortion further. But the second stage of distortion only saturates the kick drum, making it a bit warmer. And the second plugin is the LFO tool that shortens the 909 kick. The 909 doesn't need to be as short as the transient. Of course, we want that sound to fill the mid frequencies of the kick drum, so that's why I have created such a volume modulation curve. Again, I would like to point out that the 909 kick drum doesn't need to be as short as the transient kick drum. So not only I have added an extra point to make this 909 kick a bit longer, but also please look at this fader here. You can treat it as a dry-wet fader for the whole LFO tool plugin. With this fader, I tell by how many decibels I can turn down the volume of the 909 using this volume modulation. When this is set to 0, it's as if the plugin is bypassed. If I used 100% here, you can see that in the end, the 909 kick drum is going to be completely silent. I don't need that 909 to be completely silent, but I need it to be much quieter. That's why this fader goes up to 84. Alright. The kick drum is shorter, it's also quieter after some time, so again, it's time to filter out some low and high frequencies. Once again, I'm making sure that I don't remove the frequencies from around 200 and 300 Hz range. As I've shown you before, these frequencies are what we need in the kick drum transient. The 909 starts to play right from the beginning as well, so we can use this 909 kick sound to enhance the beginning of the kick drum too. So again, it would be pointless to cut out these 200 or 300 Hz frequencies. This kick drum needs to sound much darker. I don't need here any high end, and also I don't need lots of mid end. That's why the low pass filter is set lower than in case of the transient sound. In the end, I adjust the volume of the 909 kick in relation to the fast transient sound I have done. Let's turn on the fruity balance, and now let's see how these two sounds work together. Well, despite adding the 909 kick sound, we can hear that the kick drum is quite weak in the beginning. The transient still needs to be more powerful, but to achieve that, we will need to use other kick drum samples. Before we do that, let's try to use the same 909 kick sample for the third time, and now we will create a rumble sound that fills the low end for the Bochka kick. It means that once more I will duplicate the channel where I've picked the 909 kick sample. And again, I assign this kick drum rumble sound to a different channel in the mixer. In that mixer channel, the first plugin I will be using is the Convolution XD reverb. Convolution XD plugin is a great substitution for Ableton's hybrid reverb that I love to use to create a rumble sound. Both plugins use a convolution engine to create a reverb sound, so it means that we are using a very short audio files out of which the reverb is created. In my opinion, the reverb made that way suits the rumble sounds more because the rumble sound is more chaotic and is less, let's say, constant. It simply helps making the kick drum sound more industrial. Let's start with picking the right impulse response out of which the rumble sound will be created. Aside from adding more low end to the kick drum, we are also adding the mid and high frequencies that in the rumble sound will be pretty useless. So to focus better on adjusting the plugin to get the low end we need, I can put some low pass filter already. You don't have to bother with adjusting that low pass filter very accurately, because at first we need to shape the reverb sound. One of the knobs that is going to change the rumble sound a lot is the stereo width of the reverb. Now the reverb plays at stereo, and we can hear, especially if you are using headphones, that the rumble sound is very wide. But typically, kick drums are quite narrow in the stereo field, which means that we should turn this knob down to get our rumble sound to be more focused and maybe solid. Can you notice that with a more narrow reverb, the rhythm we have in the low end, that chaotic rhythm, is audible more? If we make a reverb wide, we can hear that indeed on the side something cool is playing as well. I don't need to get rid of that completely, so the width doesn't have to stay at 0. We can keep it at around 10%. Because out of this mixer channel, I want to get only the reverb rumble sound, definitely the mix goes all the way up to 100%. When it comes to the rhythm itself, the first thing we can adjust is that set of 4 knobs. They are going to shape that impulse response file out of which the reverb is created. So for example, we can play that impulse response file from a different moment, from a different place. This is going to change the rumble heavily. The decay knob that is usually used to control the length of the reverb will be also used to shape the rhythm of the rumble. It is important to just make the reverb long enough so it's as long as a single beat in our track. That's what I want to keep in mind when readjusting the decay knob. To control the rhythm of the rumble sound, I can also use the stretch knob. The stretch knob can also change a bit the pitch of the rumble sound. In the end, I created this rumble sound. Now what will be important, at least for me, is to export this rumble sound to a separate WAV file. It's going to have a few benefits. For example, if there is a need to pitch up or down this rumble sound, I can do that easily from the channel settings menu. Using the scale knob in the Control.gxt plugin doesn't give me that much of a control over the pitch of the sound. There are also a few other minor reasons for why I would like to export the rumble to a separate WAV file. For example, I would like also the reverb to sound exactly the same whenever I play it. So, once I make sure that the volume of the rumble sound doesn't cross that absolute 0 dB ceiling, I would like also to turn off the low pass filter I added earlier. I'm going to reapply that low pass filter and fine tune it after exporting the rumble. I want to make sure that the 909 kick and the transient sounds are turned off. And this second pattern is something I want to put on the playlist. Switch to playing the song, and this is something I want to export now. The default export settings are going to be fine enough. What is the most important is to use the WAV file, at least 24-bit one. And from now on, I would like to work on the kick drum using the playlist and not the pattern player. So let's keep the pattern I have pasted here in the mixer. The rumble channel I have here should be turned off because I will be using now an exported rumble sound. I'm turning back the 909 and the transient sound. So when I play the playlist now, we hear only these two sounds I've created earlier. Now let's find in the project the exported rumble sound. And once I drag the exported rumble sound onto the playlist, I also want to be sure that this exported rumble sound is assigned to a separate channel in the mixer. For me, it's the channel number 15. And now to continue working with the rumble sound, we will need to reapply that low pass filter, but also some additional saturation can be useful. And definitely, we need to use some sidechain compression. So maybe let's begin with using the sidechain compression that is, well, mandatory. Or maybe instead of a sidechain compression on that rumble export channel, I can use another LFO. With this volume modulation curve, I'm mimicking a sidechain compression effect. So again, in the beginning the rumble stays muted, but later I bring back the volume of the rumble sound quickly. And very soon the low frequencies in that moment, when the rumble is muted, are going to be filled with another kick punch sound. So that's another kick drum layer that we will be using to enhance the whole transient of the kick. And the rest of the exported rumble sound processing will look a bit similar to what we have seen earlier. So here we have a low pass filter I'm using after the LFO tool. As I have said, this low pass filter is going to be readjusted and refined, so in the end I decided to bring down the cutoff frequency that low to around 104 Hz. As every other kick drum element, the rumble itself can be also saturated to make the sound a bit fatter. So that is why, after the low pass filter, I'm using the isotope trash tool for another time. Now I don't need to distort the sound that much, so inside of the trash module, I'm using only the first distortion stage. So as you saw, I used isotope trash 2 to make the rumble sound fuller. The isotope trash 2 adds more mid-frequencies to the sound. One could ask a question: to add more mid-frequencies to the sound, I could also turn up the cutoff frequency in a low-pass filter. Why instead of that? I'm using the distortion because the rumble sounds more aggressive that way. Sometimes when you distort a rumble sound, you are going to get a cool texture, but unfortunately along with that you can get a bit too much of mid or high, and it's not uncommon to use another low-pass filter after the distortion to again make the rumble sound a bit darker. The last two effects in the exported rumble processing chain are the equalizer with a low-pass filter, and another volume adjustment to adjust the volume of the rumble sound in relation to the transient of the kick drum and 909 kick sound. Now let's see what does the kick drum sound like with and without that exported and finished rumble sound. Everything is getting more and more full, and we understand that now we need to enhance the transient even more. But before we do that, there is one more thing I want to do to the rumble sound itself. And for that I have to come back to the playlist. I told you that if I export the rumble sound, I can make the rumble sound exactly the same whenever I play it. That's because I can paste a single part of the rumble sound all over the kick drum. We can also adjust the sample settings. Let's right click the clip and open the channel settings, and from here, if I want to change the rhythm of the rumble, that is again sidechained, I can play the sample from a different place, and you can see that the changes apply to all the rumble clips. That would be the way to work with the rumble rhythm for yet another time. But what else we can do in the channel settings? We can also change the pitch of the rumble sound if we want the low end to sit deeper. I can also stretch a bit the sample to make it longer or shorter. Taking into consideration the Convolution XD plugin settings, the channel settings of the exported rumble sound, the distortion settings, there are hundreds of rumble sounds we can create that way. Talking about the channel settings, I can also open the channel settings for each kick drum element, that is the 909 sample and the first transient sound, and here to make the kick drum fit better, to make the kick sound better, I can also stretch or pitch up and down some of the samples. I'm going to leave the rumble sound with a slightly different sample start value to give the rumble a bit different rhythm, And now let's open the channel settings for these two remaining kick sounds. And while I'm not interested in changing the channel settings for the transient sound itself, I will open the 909 kick channel settings and I will stretch the sample just a bit using the time stretch knob. Our kick drum needs to have its transient enhanced. Definitely we need more low frequencies in the beginning of the kick drum, we need a bit of punch there, but also other kick drum sounds have to be played on top of the transient we currently have. For that, I would like to use different samples, and the 909 I have used for 3 different kick elements so far. And now we are going to use some Vengeance kick drum samples. And maybe let's begin with the sample that is supposed to give us some low end punch in the beginning of the kick drum. So for that I picked 3 Vengeance kick drums from the breakbeat category. Each of these kick drums has enough punch and is quite short. The low end doesn't have to be that fat because all the low end already comes from the rumble sound we have here on the playlist. Again, I'm going to play each of these kick drums to decide which one sounds most interesting. In my opinion, the second sample here sounded best. This is what I'm going to add to the whole kick drum. The kick drum sample we will use for the low end punch is assigned to again a separate channel in the mixer. And the first thing we will use is the LFO tool. Apart from making the kick drum a bit shorter, I also created a small fade in just to make this kick drum hit a bit softer. Such adjustments were done when I was playing this kick punch sound with other kick drum elements, so we should add them at first to fine-tune the LFO tool or any other plugin that I add to this kick drum channel. This kick drum element has to give only the punch in the low frequencies area. There is no need to distort this sample. I'm going to use only a volume adjustment, that is the fruity balance effect, and a low pass filter. And these are the settings for the kick drum that is giving me the low end punch. As you could hear, this punch kick sound still had some click in the high frequencies that I had to cut to keep my kick drum sounding like a Bochka kick, but also to reduce the amount of punch I'm adding, the sample had to be turned down by almost 8 decibels. Regarding using different kick drum samples, there will be one more kick sample I will use to further enhance the transient of the kick drum. Let's use Vengeance kick drums once again. We are using the exact same workflow as before. Now, the Vengeance kick drums that come from the bass drums category are going to be a bit more fat. They are also going to have more of the mid frequencies that I will use to enhance the transient of the Bochka kick. These are the 2 samples I will try to use. Let's see which one is going to sound better. In my opinion, definitely this sample sounds much better. I'm going to add it again to a separate mixer channel. Before adding any effects to the mixer, I will open the channel settings, and to make this kick drum element even more original, I'm going to experiment with pitch and time stretch knobs. Pitch and down kick sample is usually going to give more interesting results, so let's start out with pitch and down this kick. I'm going to process this kick drum in nearly the same way as the first kick drum sample I've used in today's tutorial. So at first, distortion LFO tool to shorten the kick drum, and maybe some equalization. At first I turned down the volume of this kick drum because it's way too loud in relation to other kick sounds. And now onto the rest of the effects. We will use saturation once more, but this time to make things more interesting, instead of Isotope Trash 2, let's use the new fangled Saturate plugin. The first thing I want to do is to use quite a lot of drive. When I add enough distortion to this kick drum, it will be easier for me to set up the remaining plugins that fine-tune the character of the distortion. Of course, with this much of distortion, the output volume gets louder as well, so let's switch from automatic output adjustment to manual to bring down a few decibels of this kick drum. And even with the current settings, the kick drum already gets fuller because of the saturation that we have to fine-tune now using the detail preservation, symmetry, clipper shape, and additionally ceiling faders. And these are the settings I'm going to use in the end. Because the change in sound is subtle, let's listen at first to this kick drum in solo. To see how much of saturation I'm adding to this kick drum sound, now I will play remaining kick sounds and show you the difference with and without the newfangled plugin. The rest of processing will be familiar. We will be using the LFO tool, a set of low and high pass filters, and a volume adjustment to blend this layer with other kick drum elements. The settings of these effects are similar to what we have seen earlier. Let's turn on each effect one by one, while having other kick drum sounds playing in the background. The most important thing here was the LFO tool that, again, cut the tail of the kick drum, so we only emphasize the transient part of it. Because of that, the rumble that follows the transient can be still heard well. And the second transient sound for the kick drum is finished. Now I want to enhance the transient even more, but adding another kick drum sample on top is not going to change the sound by much. I have another idea to try out. We are going to route some of the kick elements into a group. For that I need to create a new channel in the mixer. This channel is called Kick Trans Processing, to which I route the kick drum transient, the kick punch, and the second transient I've created a while ago. We also have to unplug these three channels from the master channel. And the routing should work in a way that if I turn off this transient parallel processing group, we will hear only the 909 and exported rumble sound. On that group I have just created, I'm going to apply the same set of effects we have seen earlier. So, LFO tool, some distortion, and maybe equalization and volume adjustments. Let's overview how I set up these effects. I have soloed these three kick drum elements to show you better what is happening inside of that transient processing group. The first effect I used is, again, the Isotope Trash 2. And here the distortion is going to be a bit more interesting. At first, as always, I use the first distortion stage to transform the sound most. This helps to add more crackle to the transient itself. The second saturation or distortion stage, again, is going to make the kick drum a bit warmer. The change in the sound here is going to be more subtle. But now what is going to be interesting is an additional filter section turned on. By default, according to the signal routing, the first filter is before the thrash module. So what are we doing with this equalizer before the distortion stage? I'm using a high-pass filter with lots of resonance. This helps to shape the sound of the distortion further. So let's see the transient of the kick drum with and without that extra filter added. What you can hear is that if I add this filter, some additional crackle in the end is added to the kick drum. We can call this as a maybe feedback signal. So this is the sound that I need to cut away. By using a LFO tool with another volume automation, I cut out everything that is not playing in the beginning of the kick drum. So we are left with the transient again. In the equalization, again, I'm using a high pass and a low pass filter at the same time. A high pass filter is added so we don't mix the low frequencies. And because the amount of crackle and noise is a bit too high, I need to use a low pass filter to make the transient sound dull again. You could hear that with these many frequencies removed, the sound seems to be quieter. That's why, in the end, I adjust the volume of this transient, of this new kick drum transient. The fruity balance that adjusts the volume goes after the equalizer. And now, this is the moment where I will apply some group processing. We have to make our mixer routing a bit more complicated. Let's create another mixer channel. And to that group, I'm going to route everything. So, the output of the transient kick processing, we route it to the kick group processing. We unplug it from the master channel. The second kick transient sound also gets routed to the group processing. The punch kick sound as well, the rumble, the 909 kick, as well as the first transient we have ever created. And now we have a situation where we can experience parallel processing because some of the sounds, that is the first kick transient, the kick punch, the second transient, these sounds are routed to two different channels at the same time. Once again, let's overview the whole routing because it's quite complicated. The first transient sound gets processed by both transient group processing and the whole kick group processing channel. The 909, we have to unplug it actually from the master channel too, and the 909 gets routed only to the kick group processing. The exported rumble also gets unplugged from the master channel. It needs to go only to the kick group processing. The kick punch is the sound that I want to process twice, as shown below. The same applies to the kick transient. But also, the output of the transient group processing is routed back to the kick group processing. And with this whole a bit complicated mixer routing, we are ready to apply group processing to the whole kick drum sound. Again, we can expect some saturation to come in, but also I will use here a multiband compression to glue the mid frequencies. In the whole kick drum group processing channel, I removed 2 decibels to make sure that I don't hit the 0 dB ceiling, and the first effect that goes into the group processing is the isotope thrash 2. We have been using distortion in lots of different places in this project, so this time I don't need to distort the kick by much. I just want to glue everything together a bit using the trash section. You can see by the looks of the wave shape and distortion curve that we are not going to mangle the sound by a lot. Also, I'm using the mix fader to blend the saturation to the kick drum to have an even more subtle impact on the sound. Maybe we could even argue and say that this trash module only makes the kick drum a bit louder, but what is going to be much more important is the multiband compression that I'm using here in this dynamics section. According to the isotope flow graph, this compressor is after the distortion module. What is happening inside of the multiband compression? I'm not touching the low and high frequency bands, only the mid frequencies are going to get compressed a bit. The reason for using a compressor here is to again to glue everything together. Those who watch my videos for a longer time might already get bored of what I'm going to say now, but again, multiband compression is a quite complicated subject. If you want to learn more about multiband compression, I can send you to another video I did. This is an Ableton tutorial, but the things I teach you here about using a multiband compressor can be applied with the same result in FL Studio, regardless of whether you use FL Studio's multiband compressor or the dynamics module in the isotope trash 2. Because only the mid frequencies are processed here, let's solo this frequency band. And I want to show you how I am applying that subtle compression to the mids to glue everything together. The change in the sound is subtle, and that's completely fine. Now let's listen to the whole kick drum with all the frequencies playing, with and without the dynamics module. In that whole kick drum group processing, you will also see me using an equalizer for the first time in a bit more sophisticated way. Aside from boosting the lows, which is something that we need to do to make the kick drum feel deeper, I'm also boosting some of the mids to give, especially the transient of the kick drum, more presence. Let's turn on and off each equalizer band one by one to show you how does the kick drum is going to change. We start off with a high-pass filter that sits very low at 37 Hz. This is going to not only clean up the low end a bit by getting rid of the frequencies that we will almost not hear, but also this equalizer is not a linear phase equalizer, so additional phase shift created by this high-pass filter is going to shape the low end in one way or another. Sometimes such a high-pass filter can make the low end of your kick sound better, sometimes not. But if you want to try to use such a filter, it's best to use it in the whole kick drum group processing. With the next filter, we boost the sub-frequencies. In case the kick drum gets a bit too rumbly, I can make a cut somewhere around 150 Hz range. And now both band 3 and 2 are going to boost particular frequencies to emphasize the transient of the kick drum. Do you remember when I have been talking about these, let's say, Bochka frequencies? Whenever I was high-passing a kick drum sound, I wanted to make sure that I don't remove the frequencies from around 250 Hz. That's because these frequencies are needed to create that characteristic transient sound. Now in the group equalization, I boost these frequencies to emphasize the transient even more. But the second filter I'm using here boosts the 1 kHz frequency range. It's a equalization trick that you can often use to give the kick drum a bit more of that click when I need it. The seventh filter is a high shelf filter. I use it to make the whole kick drum a bit brighter by boosting a wide range of high frequencies. In the end, a slight cut at 8K makes this kick drum a bit less noisy. I mean, we will be removing a bit of the air that could get to the kick drum. The change in the sound created by each individual filter might not be large, so now let's preview the kick with and without the whole equalizer. In the very end, individual kick sounds can be also equalized, but just a bit, because as you could see, even equalizing the whole kick drum didn't change the sound by much. So you don't need to bother a lot with equalizing other kick drum elements. I'm doing this to literally fine-tune the whole sound. So for example, in the first transient sound, I boost a bit of high end. In the exported rumble sound, to make the tail of the kick drum a bit deeper, I'm cutting away just a bit of the mids. The second kick drum transient gets additional high-end boost. And regarding the equalization, this would be everything. Now to finish things off, I will put a clipper plugin in the end of the kick drum group processing. That is because I would like to make this kick drum just a tiny bit flatter. I want to reduce the peak I can see in the beginning of the kick drum's waveform. In my opinion, it's not going to matter what kind of clipper plugin you are going to use. This is a freeware plugin, one of the simplest clipper plugins. Now, to the left, you will see the waveform of the kick drum before using the clipper. And as you can see, there is some peak that we can cut. If I do that with a clipper, the whole kick drum is going to be just a bit more solid. It's literally as easy as bringing the clipper to the chain and turning down the clip amount until you get a satisfying sound.